All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have my guest today, Neil Markey. Neil, welcome.
Hey, Guy. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. So as a captain in the U.S. Army Special Operations 2nd Ranger Battalion, Neil was deployed once to Iraq and twice to Afghanistan. After, as an MBA, MIA master's student at Columbia University, he suffered from depression and PTSD. This led him to alternative well-being practices and marked the start of a profound healing journey with mindfulness and psychedelics. Now, as a co-founder and CEO of Beckley Retreats, he's passionate about sharing the science-backed benefits of psychedelics in conjunction with the contemplative practices that support holistic well-being. At BR, he's dedicated to building a business that operates with the utmost integrity, both internally and across the many communities it will touch. Neil, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start off. Well, before we start off here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I grew up in a small town in Maryland called Frederick. It's about an hour north of DC. And right now I'm in Mexico in a small town about an hour north of Puerto Vallarta, hiding out for the winter.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
So let's get into it here. How the heck did all this start for you?
Yeah, it's been a windy road. I was doing my undergrad, at University of Maryland, and I was studying math. And I thought I was going to go do something with the intelligence agencies and do crypto. They hire a lot of math graduates from Maryland. It's right down the street. And I had a bit of a gift in math. I really loved it. And then September 11th happened. And long story short, I ended up in the service. I really thought that the country was at risk and I wanted to kind of serve and do my part. And then, the interesting thing was by the time I got through all the training and got to Iraq, we had learned that the weapons of mass destruction narrative was wildly wrong and that we were arguably making the worst foreign policy mistake in the history of the United States by being there. So it was challenging, to say the least. And then, I got the opportunity to serve in the Ranger Regiment. And it was really exciting. I really looked up to the guys that were there, the real operators. I was more of a support guy, but I did my part. Obama was talking about the missions these guys were doing on the news. Leroy Petrie was a soldier there that got the Medal of Honor when I was there. So it was this kind of larger than life time, but it was incredibly traumatic. There was trauma everywhere, and it was actually it was in the organization. Like when I did my first deployment, a lot of those guys had done 10, they'd been deploying nonstop since September 11th. And so, it leaves marks on, it gets you central nervous system. You get into this fight or flight state, when you're walking around with your fists clenched for so many years. And it's hard to wind out of. It's really hard to wind out of. It takes a lot of work.
Well, I think that therein lies the entree to this discussion here. When and how and why did you get out?
Well, I was a bit smoked, and again, I can't even imagine the guys that were like even more in it and had done many more deployments, but I was exhausted. I had a head injury and had some issues with that from an airplane jump. And in the Ranger Regiment, it's interesting. If you're an officer, you can't kind of move up. You have to go back into the regular Army first and then move up the chain and then apply to come back in. So for the captains at the time, the decision was get out or go back to the regular Army. And frankly, I didn't have a really good experience in the regular Army at all. So I followed what a lot of the guys that were a few years in front of me were doing, was going back to school. And I applied to a few programs. I got accepted into Columbia when I was in Afghanistan. And and just I needed a break. I really needed a break.
And when did you begin experiencing symptoms? How did that unfold for you?
It starts early, right? There's like the big T traumas and the little T traumas. The big T's are these like intense events. I had a couple close calls in Iraq. And then you're just in these, we pick up on each other's central nervous systems. So when you're around a lot of people that have central nervous systems that are in fight or flight, it just becomes the new norm. And so, I was having symptoms midway through my service time, and then they got, I would say, progressively worse. So it's like sleeplessness, relationships struggle because, you become mechanized, you train to be able to do hard things. And then it's hard to go home to your friends and family and be a warm, empathetic, connected individual. The folks that can do it, it's miraculous to me. And so, I was having some of those issues, and alcoholism is rampant in the service because people are trying to numb. And I didn't have the best relationship with alcohol for a period of time. And then I think when I got to grad school, I was a fish out of water. I had been living a whole different life. And then I'm in New York City, and just around a completely different mindset. And then the mission was gone. The brotherhood was gone. Kind of what I knew was gone. And then that's when I think things kind of got a bit scary for me. But it was interesting because I was doing very well professionally. Like I had one side of my life I was able to really keep together. I was at a really good school. I'd been a highly ranked officer, and I was getting job offers at these really prestigious companies. But I was spiraling, and then that's when I tried a lot of different things. I tried SSRIs and anti-anxiety medications, and they'd work for a period and then they wouldn't work, or the symptoms were worse than or the side effects were worse than the original symptoms. And
right.
And I got connected to a guy at Columbia who was teaching a mindfulness course, and that kind of started me on this path. Meditation was kind of my first entry into this new world of non-traditional, I guess non-Western traditional. It's actually very traditional, but we forgot about them in our societies.
And what was your experience with meditation?
Well, meditation was interesting. I just had this like deep kind of embodied intuitive knowingness that I needed it. It was super hard for me because when your body is in that fight or flight, many of us are in it. It's a spectrum, you know what I mean? So many of us are kind of chronically in it. But when you try and meditate, the mind, the central nervous system is really activated, and the mind is really activated because it's essentially looking for threats, So when you try and get it to settle down and stay in one place for a period of time, it's hard. And I remember, doing the exercises, and I couldn't count to 2, before my mind would jump. What's next? What's next? Bing, 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 bing. But I had I guess this the soldier's discipline, and I was like, I'm going to sit, and I just knew I needed it. And over time, it gets easier, and then you start to have some of the benefits. But it takes a lot of work, and I think that's where psychedelics can come in. To me, they should be used with a foundation of meditation, and they can be used to accelerate the benefits of meditation. But they need to be used really wisely.
So how did it get to the point where you were introduced to psychedelics? And as we can kind of move into the founding of Beckley Retreats here, how did that unfold for you?
Yeah, it was through that kind of same network of meditators that I had the opportunity to do a psilocybin experience with some doctors that were interested in treating veterans. And then that was a big opening for me. It was profound. And then that kind of started me on this multi-year journey when I was in grad school, where I was researching this a lot myself, and studying and doing meditation programs and experimenting with psychedelics that I could get my hands on.
Well, if I may, Neil, 1 second here. So I want to, if we can put a little magnifying glass around that experience for you that was so profound, talk about that more if you could.
it was a mid-dose Cubensis psilocybin. I did it in a home in upstate New York, and with a couple facilitators, and had music, and it was, had intention and the right kind of approach to it. And I did the standard blindfold and lay there for a while. And it's hard to articulate or describe it, but you enter into some different consciousness, that you've never been before. And you get some clarity around things surface. I was crying. And yeah, it was pretty intense. And
had you ever done that before?
Not in that way, no.
Not in that way. Okay.
No, not in that way. Recreationally, but not. It's very different. As I know, that the intention matters, the setting matters, the dose matters, the facilitation matters, the lead up matters, the after work matters. All the psychonauts of Tim Leary's and the gurus of last century, they'd say that the compound is less than 50% of the equation. It's all the other things that really matter, and you got to get those right.
So you walked away from that thinking what, with regards to your own healing?
Keep going. Yeah. Keep going. Yeah. I mean, the deeper the trauma, the more times it needs to be let go, and so, it's not a one and done thing. I mean, you can definitely get some relief, for sure. But the trauma is in the body, and it's in the neural pathways, it's in the subconscious, and it's deep. If it's childhood, it's even deeper, it's just, and if it's extended periods of time, it's deeper. Your body has become accustomed to this way of being. And so it takes a lot of work, it's when you've been wound as tight as I had been wound.
All right, let's just pause here for a second to thank our sponsors. All right, we are back. Now, I'm curious about, you talked a little bit about being in the service and then coming out and the expectations and how challenging it is to shift. What was your own experience in terms of recognizing your own trauma, your own well-being? Was that challenging for you to even admit that you'd been traumatized?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. And I think there's this weird thing that happens in the veteran community too. It's a weird thing when you start measuring trauma, and you start comparing trauma, because it's all relative, right? It's all individual. But I think for folks like myself that didn't have it near as bad as guys that, had limbs lost, and, I mean, mine is so minor compared to so many, that you almost there. And then, you kind of get trained. There's this, the service kind of trains you to suck it up and drive on, right? You don't have time to do that stuff, so you gotta, and so that just becomes habit, and it's hard to pause and make change,
How did it get to the point where you were like, okay, I want to start, I'm on this healing journey. I want to start teaching or working with other people?
Yeah. So I mean, over in grad school, I was getting really involved in meditation. I was kind of co-facilitating some of these meditation classes at Columbia University, and was experimenting myself and, learning more about spirituality. And also, I love looking at the physics side of this work, right? And like the nature of things. And if you dig in there deep enough, you get to the same thing that a lot of the organized religions are pointing at. It's just, you got to take the time to get to a level of understanding. And then I graduated school, and I did a teacher certification in meditation in Jefferson University. And then I started kind of teaching it more formally. I was teaching veterans and intelligence community guys and business leaders. And I was doing a lot better. I was actually in a good place. I moved back home. I was working on a small local business with my brother. I had good community. I had good practices. I was in nature a lot, and everything kind of life isn't as hard when you're taking good care of yourself. Things fall into place. Things are syncing up. There's the serendipity. And then I had been deferring this job offer with McKinsey and Company, which is this, prestigious company that the business world kind of puts on a pedestal to some extent. And I asked them for another deferral because I kind of liked what I was doing, kind of hobbying around. And they were like, no, we're not going to be your permanent backup plan. And so I ended up going. I wanted to see what was behind the curtain. And I went there, and that was kind of this period of, I would say, misalignment in terms of who I want to be in the world and my values and with the work I was doing and the environment that I was operating in. And so then my mental health kind of went the wrong way for a handful of years. And then I hit another mini rock bottom, after 5 years in there, and then in private equity and doing these restructuring work, and then reset. And then that was like 3 years ago. And, and then this thing with Beckley and this kind of new path for me kind of came quite organically. And I think, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is the stuff I love it. I'm fascinated by it. And it's I know that we're doing meaningful work and helping people. And that's how I want to spend my time. I don't want to chase money and live a hyper materialistic life. It's just a fool's errand. It's just the lie that we've all been told.
How did your idea of, who you wanted to be shift once you got out of the service? What was your idea when you got out of the service? What was your idea of who you wanted to be and what you wanted to do?
Well, there's just so much cultural pressure and momentum around us. I don't know if when I was in grad school, if I stopped to think about that and and I think I got a bit caught up in the ego, chasing money and the prestige of some of these fancy jobs. And I don't come from a prestigious background. I'm like a lower middle class kid from Frederick, Maryland. But so those industries and those jobs, they're shiny, and then you get them and then you realize that it's like a complete mismatch. And so it was over that period of time when I started having more and more money and more career progression and more things, but more and more stress, and then more and more unhappiness. And then I got to this point where I was like, I've made it. I was the youngest executive at this $500 million company by 16 years in my mid 30s. But I was miserable, and I had a lot of things, but my relationships were struggling, and I wasn't doing well, so it was like, what am I doing? This is just pointless. And I'm looking around at all my peers who, many of them are quite fortunate and well educated. And some of them were doing kind of really well emotionally and from kind of a well-being perspective. But a lot of them were super stressed out and addicts, right? Alcohol or prescription pills and uppers in the morning and downers in the evening. It's everywhere. It's crazy how pervasive it is in the United States. And I just got to a point where I was like, I'm just kind of fed up. I was just a bit disgusted with myself, and I just reset, just hard reset.
So let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Neil Markey. He's co-founder and CEO of Beckley Retreats. So what does Beckley Retreats do? What do you folks do?
Yeah, we run integrative well-being programs using psychedelics as a tool. And so our programs, they're 11 weeks long. That's 4 weeks of digital preparation where we teach some of these basic well-being practices. Again, meditation's foundational, presence practice is foundational. We do these programs in groups because I believe that's how we're meant to do this work, how we're supposed to heal. We're supposed to heal in community. We're supposed to heal in nature. We're not just supposed to take a pill and think it's going to fix us. So we teach these practices at the beginning, and then we bring people down on a 6-day intensive where we do those practices together, but it's a digital detox. We create space around the experiences. This is really important. And we do 2, mid to high dose psilocybin sessions in a group with very high caliber facilitation. And then on the back end, we have 6 weeks of digital integration. And this is a huge part of it. Like from a neuroscience perspective, it looks like what the high dose psychedelic compounds do is they put the brain into a more malleable state or a more neuroplastic state. They open up potentiality, and then you can do something with it. But if you don't, what's the problem right now with a lot of the use is just people just take it and then they go back to their old lives. Well, the brain is going to collapse back to the way it was. That's what it knows. But if you consciously make effort, you've got this window where you can make some real change.
So this might seem like an obvious question, but who's coming to you?
Yeah, it's quite diverse groups. I mean, I love the diversity. We had a program with a 72-year-old and a 24-year-old. I would think there is some clustering around kind of white collar professionals right now because I think because of my background and some of the team's background, and a lot of it's been word of mouth. Mm-hmm. And white collar professionals are burnt out and tired of the rat race and want to make change, So, but we're seeing a lot of folks from different backgrounds show interest. I think that, in the last 2 years, it went from completely taboo to near mainstream. I mean, you got Prince Harry talking about it. You got Deepak Chopra talking about it. I mean, it's everywhere. It's in Forbes, it's in The Economist. So it's even folks that were highly skeptical. It's getting to the point where it's like hard to deny that there's something here, and more people are saying, okay, as long as I can make sure it's safe and people know what they're doing, I'm going to give it a shot. Right.
So you mentioned mid to high dosing, and there's been a lot of talk of micro dosing. So help us explain, aside from just the quantity aspect of it, what's the difference in terms of the healing or the journey, et cetera, in those doses?
Yeah. It's different approaches for different people. The high doses is obviously it's more intense. It's a more spiritual or, consciousness expanding kind of boom happens right there in those 6 hours. People oftentimes come out of those and they're just like, wow, like, where microdosing is technically, it's a non-perceptible dose. So it's in the background. You might notice colors a bit brighter. You might notice that you're not as reactive, that you're able to kind of like stay in the in-between a little bit better. And I think both are good, but both are, I don't think we want to use them as tools and then transition to the meditation as the foundation and use compounds from time to time, but within reason and safely and thoughtfully. You can also use psychedelics as an escape. If you don't use them the right way, they can they create potentiality. So it's not necessarily always good. The mindset matters, that we're dealing with consciousness shifts. So like what the intention and what you're doing and why you're doing it, has a very significant impact on outcomes.
During your own healing journey, my guess is you had seen a therapist of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was your experience?
A few different times.
Yeah. What was your experience with that like?
Mixed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I made some progress. I mean, I had some good therapists, and I had some, I would say, therapists that and also therapy is kind of a fit thing. You got to find somebody that you resonate with that can understand you and you're on the same plane. And so, yeah, it has a lot to do with just the fit. But yeah, I think it's good. I mean, and the reality is we talk about psychedelics a lot, but all the research is on psychedelic assisted therapy. It's psychedelic assisted therapy. Right. Therapy is the key word. And so, we've got to change the conversation and, get off this idea that psychedelics are this like magic pill that's going to fix everything for us. It's like they're a tool. They're a really powerful tool. But they need to be used in conjunction with a program or some professional help or, a bit more mindfulness.
So as we kind of get ready to wind down here, who should come to see you guys?
Yeah. So our programs are non-medical, right? So we screen out severe medical indications. It's partially because of the legal frameworks in which we're operating in Jamaica and the Netherlands. And it's just kind of the approach that we're taking. I mean, we see a lot of benefit in the betterment of the well, right? So taking healthy normals and getting them more happy, more empathetic, more connected, more creative. You can do a lot of these things, with the neuroplasticity of the mind, through psychedelics. And I would say there's a few categories of people. One is folks will come down and they'll say something like, I'm just stuck. This is the white collar professionals. They're just like, I'm in my job. I don't like my job. I can't make a change. I don't know. The train is running down the track and they have not been able to make a meaningful change, and they just want to have some opportunity to do so. These programs are very good for that. Like they can be a kind of hard reset. We have folks come down that will have experienced some recent loss. So like a loss of a job or a loved one, and they want to pay it the reverence that it deserves and confront it, but move on from it, get on with life. And so I think, again, these programs can be really helpful for that. And then we have folks that come down that are just adventurers and spiritual seekers and long-term meditators, and they want to just try psychedelics in a controlled manner, but it's really just for personal exploration and growth. And, it's great for that. It can be, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be broken to benefit, not far from that. You can be actually highly functioning and get, even more connected, right? Where you just feel this peace more often. You feel more in tune with things, right? You feel more gratitude, right? And actually see what most of our lives are is these really beautiful, unique flowerings of the universe, instead of being in these mental loops around, oh, it could be better, woe is me, you can minimize that.
And you talked about, loss of a job, but which could be traumatizing. But what about those people who have experienced trauma, PTSD or complex trauma?
Yeah, I mean, we look at kind of the whole, we have a pretty robust screening form, and, we look at those on a case-by-case basis. It's really if someone has complex PTSD from the past, but they have all of the other things in place, they have good support systems, they've been doing the work for some time, and this is just the next logical step, then there's an opportunity potentially for them to come on the program. If they're on high levels of meds, addiction's bad, they're really in a bad shape, our programs aren't a good fit. And we point those folks towards more kind of clinical medical applications where they can get help and get up to a certain standard. Yeah.
Got it. Awesome. All right, Neil, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you and learn about what you got going on?
Yeah, I mean, Beckley Retreats. If you just Google it, it'll come up, beckleyretreats.com. Fill out the form. You can join. We have a webinar every other week. You can book a one-on-one call. And I think that, we've got a beautiful program and a really incredible team. And, we didn't really get to touch on this, but this is the continuation of Amanda Fielding's vision with the Beckley Foundation that she ran for, has been running for 25 years. She's kind of one of the really iconic leaders in this space. And now, the mission is to get it to more people, get it out of the labs, and get it to people safely. So it's an inspiring time to be involved. Awesome,
brother. All right, man. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate you coming on here and sharing your experience and your perspective. Excited to get it out there.
Thank you, Guy. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Take care.
Have a good one. See ya.